Hello there, and welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis that will help you discover, clarify, and live your purpose.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to What's the Point? As you know, I've always got great guests, and I've got another great guest today. It means a lot more to me today a little bit because today's guest is a friend of mine because she's a lifetime intimate friend of my wife. And there's so much I want to talk to her about. Please welcome Deborah Wright. Hello, Deborah.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Deb, if that's okay, as I know you.
That's perfectly fine.
So everybody, do I want to have Deb on the show because she's a friend? Well, of course, I like speaking with friends, but more importantly, I want to have some conversation with Deb this morning because when it comes to what's the point, when it comes to living one's purpose, we have to be willing to step out of our comfort zone. And Deb has done that throughout her life. So to sum up real quickly, what this woman is, who this woman is, here you go. She's courageous, adventurous, accomplished, a real weirdo, and she has grit. She has true grit. She is an advocate for ideas, people, and ethics. And there's more. There's some professional things we'll talk about, but that's kind of where I want to talk to you about, Deb. Talk to me about where you first got in touch with your courageousness and your adventuresome. Is that something that was nurture or nature?
I would say there was a nurture element. I was always treated like the oldest son, let's say, as the firstborn. Mm-hmm. There are so many different examples growing up, but one that sticks in my mind was always trying to reach out and be your best and present yourself in the best possible way so that you had as many opportunities as possible. And my father used to, I remember he had me writing resumes when I was 14 or 15. And he had this big bowl of purple fine tip felt pens, and he used to take one out and he used to strike out all the words that he said were just completely unnecessary. Anyway, so that led to opportunities, obviously. And I think the first major courageous act that I took as a young adult was I was relatively shy, believe it or not. Nobody would believe that now, but I was relatively shy, and I had the opportunity to interview and to compete for a couple of roles that were available from Procter & Gamble years ago. And it was for sales. And so for an individual that was shy, it was completely out of my comfort zone. And I remember that when I took that job offer, I cried. So I then put myself in the middle of a new city, which I'd never done that before. I went to live in Milwaukee in a studio. So I was on my own doing something that was going to be very, very scary. Mm-hmm. And to kind of nail it down, just to give you a picture, I was in a position where I needed to sell to grocery managers on the south side of Milwaukee in the meatpacking industry, and I was selling feminine hygiene. So as you can imagine, I was running after these guys up ladders into freezers, trying to get them to touch a pad with blue liquid on it to show them it was dry. And they had every word in the book for me.
And you probably got a few offers outside of sales offers, I would imagine. So let me go back to the first thing you said, Deb. You said when you accepted that job offer, you cried. And that was before the south side of Milwaukee meatpacker hustle. Explain that feeling. What were you crying about?
Well, I was scared. I was scared, but I must say that that's something that I've always held probably throughout anything. I mean, I probably was a little bit scared with the idea that you wanted to interview me. But I find, as they say, it's probably cliche, but it helps you in the end perform, I think, to some degree. But I always have pushed myself past that. Just a little side comment. I remember my husband, my late husband, actually saying to me, "Oh, Deborah, you've been doing this for a couple of years. I bet you're going into something else because you just got to keep, you just keep pushing yourself."
Yeah.
Which is, I guess I never really realized I was doing it, but I guess I do it.
Well, and that's part of the whole description that we've made here about accomplished, and another one we'll get to in a minute, performance driven. But that is already an incredibly powerful nugget for myself and everyone listening, is that you did not become frozen through your fear. You felt the fear. It was real, but you did what it took, and you were courageous enough, and you put that one foot in front of the other, and you walked into that fear. And there's a great phrase that I've heard to find what's on the opposite, on the other side of fear. Mm-hmm. And you'll never find that out if we become frozen with fear. And the other side of fear is where a lot of the payoff is.
Yes, well, that's an interesting point, because I was reflecting on when you had mentioned the point courageous, the characteristic courageous. I thought there's a handful of examples through my life, including one that was relatively recent. And now when I think about it in the realm of what you've just mentioned, as far as working through that feeling, it's an interesting reflection on it.
Well, good. And the fear, as you said, can very much be a good thing and a motivator, and something that gets us really ready to embrace whatever the challenge or our goal is right in front of us. Mm-hmm. My belief is that everyone, no matter how much they seem to be an extrovert and comfortable, have some fear. Bob Berg, the co-author of The Go-Giver, said that he would speak in front of anywhere from 10 to 10,000 people, and he always felt a touch of fear just because of the nerves, just because of the unknown. But that didn't mm-hmm. stop him from stepping on that stage and being magnificent. And it didn't stop you from heading up to Milwaukee. So how did that work? How impressed were people when they finally touched that blue pad?
Wow. Well, it was quite overwhelming for them, I suppose, but somehow I moved through it. I was in that role for a couple of years, and I remember I coincidentally met who would soon be my husband, is now my late husband, and made a decision to make another, what was kind of a little bit of a fearful move. But exciting at the same time, because when you meet somebody, it's a very exciting moment. I first told I told Procter & Gamble, that's who I was working with in Milwaukee, that I was going to be leaving after having been with them for a couple of years to move to South Africa. And it was an interesting story in itself, because I had one of the few female managers at Procter & Gamble. And she proceeded to tell me that I was somewhat of a disgrace to the female gender for leaving such, a job for a man. And when I was I was progressing towards management. And I said, well, I have enough confidence in myself that I think that I can find another job that's equally as challenging. But it's not often that you meet the person that you want to be with for the rest of your life. So that was in itself took a little courage to deal with her, because she was a bit intimidating, but not so much that I wasn't going to take it on. I then went to South Africa. Obviously, that was a huge thing. I had my family and friends that were telling me, "Are you mad?" Because all they would see on TV at the time, because this was years and years ago, were quite horrendous visuals, necklacing and, burning of people and such. It was really quite scary time. But I was able to kind of work through that. I could manage being there safely. So I went to work in South Africa and had to go. I went through the whole, obviously, again, as a relatively young adult, went through the process of looking for work, and that was a bit overwhelming. But I pushed myself forward, and I went there. But South Africa was an exciting. There was an exciting reward. It was an incredible place, tremendous diversity. Beautiful cultures, some things that were quite scary going on at the time, but I managed to live there on and off for 6 years and be there at a time even when Mandela was released. And that was an extremely exciting moment. So something, these are things that it's only a few things in life that'll be as exciting as that, so it was really worthwhile being there. And I ended up being married there, and I had my family come there. And I remember my father speaking and saying to the 110 people that were at the reception, it was the first time he'd ever had a party for 110 people he didn't know, because there was nobody there from our side of the family. It was quite a big thing to ask, a early 20-year-old to come over to South Africa for a wedding. So,
wow. So there's incredible power in that story, in that portion of your story. There's also a whole lot to break down and talk about. So, first of all, your female boss at P&G, what has been your experience? Because we'll jump into the professional arena just for a few minutes here, please, Deb. You've had several different professional situations, and what is it like for women working with women, and in particular, women working for women in the business world? Because I've heard that can be, at times, maybe a little bit more of a test than even working for men, for dynamics that I don't understand.
Well, it's an interesting question. Although I did cite that she's female, I just shared it with you just because it might be interesting in that particular scenario. But I have to tell you that this probably turns your question a little bit. I never thought of gender throughout my whole career, with the exception of when I returned to the States and eventually David and I had decided to have children. And once I was pregnant and realized that, I kind of realized I was the only one around that had been going through that, and was going to have to share that with somebody, whether I wanted to or not. It was going to become apparent that I was going to have to say something. I never thought of gender. That's never really been something. But if I reflect on it as far as working for women versus working for men, I've probably worked for more. She may be the only female that I've worked for.
Okay.
Never worked for one since. I'd like to have you ask that question of people that have worked for me throughout the years.
You send me a list. Send me a list. I'll be happy.
Because I could probably learn something and try to improve upon that.
Well, again, Deb, you're just so full of richness in your comments and your thoughts. And just in that little segment, we could talk forever. I know there's a time limit, so I have to really keep my eye on the clock. But you being so open to saying, I wonder what people that worked for me would say, is probably atypical. And that shows part of the courageousness that you have and part of the walk through the fear, because I mean, everyone that worked for you, but you never know what their feelings really are. Otherwise, you wouldn't have said that. So I think that is tremendously courageous, but it's also just an absolute great example of how we can learn and grow. And we have to learn and grow, and hearing comments and input and assessments of ourselves from others as best we can checking the emotion at the door is going to help us grow. Checking the emotion at the door, excuse me, is not necessarily my strong suit, but I think that's an incredibly powerful attribute for you to have said that. So do send the list. I will talk to them.
It is a nice thing to do in meetings, any kind of meeting, that whole stop, start, continue element. I'd like to ask at any kind of review. I say, what are the things that you'd like me to start doing that I'm not doing, or what can I continue to do to help you? But you say it and then you kind of hold your breath.
Yeah.
Because I too can get emotional. It's a double-edged sword. It's a good thing and a sometimes not so good thing.
There again, well, you are just an absolute gem, more so than I expected when you agreed to be my guest. The double-edged sword is a reality, and it does take bravery and it does take courage, but being again open to that discovery, whether it's how did I perform, or how did this task or this project or this product or whatever we're meeting on, how has that done? Not too long ago, I had a guest, Cujo, who a former U.S. fighter pilot, whose book is Debrief to Win. And he talks about part of the success of the U.S. military, in particular his fighter squadrons, were that they debriefed everything. Mm-hmm. So for you to say, I want to know what's going on, what's good, and where we can improve, just reiterates the importance of that. So we've kind of taken you from a conversation with your P&G boss. It does strike me as interesting that the point she made to you is that you were leaving a career opportunity for a man, quote unquote. But as you said, jobs are out there. And with your tremendous experience in writing resumes, I'm sure you didn't have too much issue there. Now let's get back to that move, because at the time, it wasn't an easy trip just to get to South Africa. It's much easier today with faster, better jets. Mm-hmm. But just moving from Chicago to Milwaukee to South Africa, I don't even know, were you in Cape Town or Johannesburg?
We were in Johannesburg, yes.
Okay. So that in and of itself had to be fearful. Moving there to commit your life to being a partner in a partnership with a man who obviously captured your heart adds that much more fear or anxiety. And then the whole comment you made about the difference in culture, and in particular what was going on in South Africa at that time with the whole apartheid and the different culture, yes, but some of it was pretty gnarly. And that whole experience, if anyone wants to understand why I think and know that you're adventurous, that will sum it up. Once you had the wedding and your father was there with his 110 brand new friends, what was the experience like when you were there?
Oh, it was just absolutely extraordinary. I think, well, first of all, from a weather point of view, you've got 360 days of blue skies. I mean, it's just beautiful. You've got a warm weather client most of the time. Therefore you have outdoor living, which is really beautiful, and they make the most of that with a lot of kind of family engagements. What do they call the braais? The barbecues are really a popular thing. Brings a lot of people together. On the other hand, there obviously was a lot of strife. There were a number of challenges to contend with. Just to give you a couple examples. I remember I had to be brave to go into a hospital that was really you were only allowed to be in there if you were a particular color. My sister-in-law had a beautiful young lady working for her at their home, and she had a daughter as well, a little daughter, but she's a teacher, and actually Trisha, my sister-in-law, had invested in her education by sending her to England She achieved her teaching education and went back to South Africa to kind of give back and to teach there. And unfortunately went through a significant tragedy where she was harmed. And she ended up in this hospital, and they had to take her leg as a result of this tragedy. And I went in to see her, and I realized that the only thing that was I went to see her because I realized the only thing that was going to keep her going was the thought of her baby girl. So I took a picture of her daughter and blew it up really big and brought it into the hospital. And, people are looking at me left and right because you're walking past people with hatchets in their heads and all sorts of stuff that, they're waiting to be attended to. And you have to, obviously to enter such a place, you also tend to be in an area that maybe you wouldn't normally be in for your own safety. So those types of things. And then there are things that were maybe less traumatic than that, but you felt pressured by that you had to contend with. So for example, we had a housekeeper, David and I, and she was lovely, Lena, and she was older, and we knew that someday she wasn't going to be able to be a housekeeper anymore. And so we decided to design a pension program for her and healthcare and what have you. It didn't cost us much to do it, I must say. So it's and it was the right thing to do. Well, I can just tell you, my neighbors were not happy at all because we had set a precedent, or we had, put this out there. But again, I think it kind of comes back to just trying to do the right thing, or just trying to push yourself into a place that is where you should be.
That is an incredible little vignette and says so much about you and David, who I'd never had the pleasure of meeting. But that also leads me to a few other of your attributes. And that is the fact that you are an advocate for ideas, for people, and for ethics. That's a powerful combination of those three elements. And that seems to be what we can take away from your pension story with your housekeeper. And just a real quick comment about the hospital when you were visiting, the thought of bringing that blown up picture of that woman's daughter is in and of itself an incredible idea. But then to go there in the midst of what was really out of the ordinary. When you said you're walking down the hallway and passing people with hatchets in their head, waiting to get treatment, it's almost, if it weren't real, it could have been a funny comment. But that really sums up to me your courage and your commitment to ethics and your care for people, and that's just incredible. So you were in South Africa for a while. You found your job, and did you stay there, or did you guys end up moving?
We stayed there. We were there for about 3 years. We returned, and then there was the crash in the markets in finance in New York. We could have stayed in New York, but we just decided there is this saying that once you live in Africa, it's always under your skin and you always want to go back. And quite honestly, we did go back and we stayed another 3 years. But there was a time after we returned to the States a second time, we almost went back again. I mean, it was a constant battle to want to go back, but we did decide that in the end, since the country was going to go through what we thought would be a decade of challenge, even though it was exciting that Mandela had been released, we knew that it was going to create a lot of push and pull in a lot of different ways. And safety was already a huge challenge, 6 foot walls, burglar bars, razor wire on your, Rottweilers, instant security, people living on your property. The walls had gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And we decided that if we were going to have children, which we waited 10 years to do, we knew was forthcoming, that it'd probably be better that we bit the bullet and stayed in the States. So we went back to the States again.
So you mentioned very briefly the financial crisis or the financial collapse in New York City. Just to clarify the importance of that, your late husband, David, was a commodities broker and also a rugby coach, rugby player and coach. So the impact or the importance of that financial crisis hit you very directly, given what David's career was built on.
Yes, indeed. Yes, he was an emerging market bond trader, and it was just not really it was a tough moment, but he made it through all of the firings and what have you, even though he was new in New York. But it just wasn't a very pleasant place to be for what he wanted to do. And we missed it and we wanted to go back. So we went back to South Africa, but again, eventually returned.
That's quite the battle between the tug of war between the essence of Africa that gets into you and the love and the essence of the US that gets into you. So yeah, it's not like going from Canada to the US. It's a bit of a trek. So I don't want to leave the personal side necessarily, but I did want to bring that up because the moving, the accepting the challenge, the looking at it as an adventure as opposed to being put upon are all traits that make Deb Wright the kind of person that I want everyone listening to get to know and to hear, because we all face challenges, every one of us. And everything we've talked about, Deb, you have seen that challenge, and rather than getting frozen in fear and rather than feeling a victim, you have hit it head on. And sometimes it worked great. Sometimes the outcome wasn't that great, and we can share anything about that if you'd care to. But those are the points, those are the attributes I want people listening to embrace, is to look at things and say, rather than why me, the phrase can be why not me, and what's going to come of this? What's the potential? And that's what you've done, and that's pretty impressive, I think. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being the person you are. Yeah, I'll leave the rest of your personal story up to you if you want to share any of it, but you and David had 2 children, a bright, bouncing, handsome young lad and a beautiful young girl. And so you had the kind of the perfect family.
Yeah, it's like any family, you often go through some very tumultuous moments. The first one with Christopher, who is now 25 and a big 6'8"
oh man,
guy.
Okay.
When he was about to be born, I was told he may not have arms, legs, or be able to live for more than a year, but that was extremely scary. And then had to wonder for 3 weeks whether he would be in one piece. And I was commissioned with having to ask the doctor specialist all the questions when they were doing the analysis, internal analysis. Does he have an arm? Does he have a leg? It was really, really scary. But we made it through that. He was fine. He is more than fine. He was a huge baby, actually born at a normal size, but then he grew very, very, very fast. He looked like a little Michelin body. Like a pulled pork, with like the ties around him. So he was happy and healthy. Then I had a daughter. I have a daughter that's 3 years younger, and she's terrific as well. And but we went through a challenge because when my daughter was 5 and my son was 8, David died unexpectedly from a heart attack. It was obviously devastating for my children. It was devastating for me and his family and friends. And I was also, I think in some ways it might have been a gift to have a career, but it also was another challenge to contend with. So I had the challenge at home to make sure, to deal with the nightmares and the crying and trying to understand what had happened with my children. But at work, I managed a group of 30 people around the world business unit for international flavors and fragrances at that time. That was over, I guess for them, over $100 million, which may not be as big of an account now, but it was one of the top 3 at the time. And I realized I couldn't work the way that I'd worked before. David had been an incredible pillar of strength for me to be able to do the work that I was doing. And I had to figure out what I was going to do. In the end, I basically I had 4 global leaders in my team, and they had their various reports in the US and around the world. And I had to, develop those that could be developed, and then also change those that couldn't step up to the task, et cetera, because I wouldn't be able to do the kind of international travel that I had been doing. And when I say the kind of international travel between personal and professional, I think I've been around 33 countries or so. So it was going to be a huge change.
Yeah.
So that was a huge thing for me. But I think we're looking for the silver linings. So I always look for the silver linings. It took a while to see those. I think, in fact, when you lose somebody, I think even though it's hard at the time, I think it's even harder at sort of the year mark, because you realize it's absolutely permanent and there's nothing you can do about it. And you keep thinking you can do something, because I've always been able to sort of sort things out, and I just could not sort that one out. But what happens is people are incredible. They step in, people show their incredible colors. There was a woman that was Sally Cohen Alamino, who lost her husband in 9/11, 3 to 4 years prior to my losing David. And she stepped in. She had daughter and son, same ages, same genders, and knew exactly what I was going through. And she was the one that even came on Mother's Day and said, "Chris, Bella, we're going to do something." And then she'd come back, and the kids would come all happy because they could give me a plant, because the nanny at the time I had to help me just didn't really connect emotionally to the fact that the kids wanted to do things for for me.
Again, so much to take from that. The simple act of caring about other people can make such a difference. And that woman, having gone through what you went through, to see that, to take the time to take her experience, and that not only helped you, that helped your children, that helped Christopher and Bella. That's great stuff. And you mentioned 9/11, more of the challenge and impact and chaos that affected your life is when David was a commodity trader. He was in the building next to the Twin Towers.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was there the day the whole incident happened.
Mm-hmm.
He lost friends,
Mm-hmm.
lost work associates. And there's something else that, as a partner, to be able to stand up and do what you can to support him and help him must have been another burden on top of everything you had in your professional life.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I was just reflecting on this recently because of the recent anniversary. Because at the time, he had missed the towers coming down by 15 minutes. He had come into the city 15 minutes earlier. He had gone to Battery Park. He was sitting in his office and he was speaking with a colleague. He happened to be looking away from the window at the time, and the colleague that he was speaking with was looking out the window, and all of a sudden there was this noise, and they all just turned and looked to see all the debris coming down the street, which was alarming, obviously. There was all sorts of plans that had to happen where they had to turn off the air handling systems and stay in the building and not move for hours and hours. And meanwhile, I was, again, with IFF at the time, and I had, I think, about 20 or 30 people from overseas in a meeting off-site that were there for the week. And all of, I was pulled aside, and they said, "I know your husband's, in this area." And I ended up touching base with David through South Africa. I could not call from New Jersey to New York. But I did find out about him through his sister in South Africa. In the end, David was able to make his way back over the Hudson and get home after about 6-8 hours. But we made a decision that I needed to stay with this group that was scared from around the world, from India and Argentina and Brazil and Mexico and, so on and so forth. And they wanted to go home, but they couldn't go home. They couldn't, and so had to, the meeting, obviously the objectives of the meeting changed dramatically. But that was, but I was, we were fortunate ones. We were all fortunate ones.
When tragedy strikes, 9/11 for basically the world, but your personal encounter with it, both David's traumatic experience of being next door watching it, you being with a group of international business associates, but then also a few years later with David's sudden, completely unexpected death from heart attack. It's completely natural for that to be devastating. And, you had made a comment earlier that, when something like that happens, you look at you try to look at the bright side, but that doesn't mean it happens right away. I mean, we all grieve. It's a loss. It's unexpected, right? So is there anything you can share, Deb, with how you learned to, either prior to or by going through it, how do you learn to kind of cope with that and adapt to the acceptance of the tragedy and looking to the future?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Breathing.
Yeah.
There was a colleague of mine, a young fellow that, ironically, he was a very emotional Brazilian, and he'd come into my office and he'd say, I'm so angry about this. I'm going to write this email. And I'd say, Sergio, just take a deep breath and go home and come back and we'll talk about it tomorrow. And he'd come back and he's like, okay, you're right. I'm not going to send that email. But he used to say to me, because I used to tell him, breathe. I guess I said it to him first, but I didn't realize, I thought it was him that said it to me, but I said, breathe. And he would come back and always say, breathe to me. And then we ended up, giving each other little things that would say breathe on them. But I think that's a lot to it, is to try to stop and take a deep breath and reflect. And, again, my kids know the same thing. I think they realize this now. I know they realize this now, that although they went through such tragedy, everybody has their sets of tragedy. And, it's just, they just have to find a way to reflect on the things that they can be thankful for.
That's terrific. And that's a perfect lead into a question I've been wanting to ask you. And that is, we've not talked a lot about your professional side, but your LinkedIn contact information will be in the show notes, because there's so much depth in your professional life as well. But both, just from your life in general, not segregating it professional, personal, you've gone through so many different challenges. You've accepted so many different adventures. You have stepped outside of your comfort zone consistently throughout your life. How do you feel? How do you see that your experience filters to coworkers, to subordinates, and most importantly, to Christopher and Bella, your children?
Okay, I hope I'm addressing this properly, but how I've taken that and how I've applied it in my work is basically to try to encourage, as I bring people together and try to bring talent together, I try to get them to feel, to instill trust that they can fail, and failing is not failing, and that by trying to progress forward, and that ultimately you'll iterate to innovate. So I guess that's the best, that don't be afraid to try, that you'll learn from that, that in fact, often in more often than not, almost always in innovation, creative development, in the case of fragrance or otherwise, anything, even in a relationship, personal or professional, I believe that it's important to get out there and just, sort of fall down a bit, hopefully fall forward, as they say.
Yeah.
But that's when you actually learn the most, and that's when you can actually accelerate to get to the target. We do a lot of innovation development, on a daily basis here, and obviously you try to develop a plan that has that mitigates some risk, but at the same time isn't a perfect plan, because it'll never be a perfect plan, and you can't be agile and succeed. So, but to really just get out there and try to iterate quickly and learn from those, and then apply it and move forward. And I think that's a personal and professional opportunity.
I agree with you 100%. And you, my friend, have the chops, as they say. You've got the street creds, if you will, to speak to anyone about accepting challenge, seeing challenge, and looking for the opportunities, realizing that not everything turns out golden. There is risk. Of course, there's risk. Stepping into a relationship that we think is correct, there's tremendous unlimited potential. There's also the risk that it's not what we think of it. So facing the fear, seeing what's on the other side, is incredible. Let me take just a real quick second to talk about your current professional life, because I find it fascinating. So you're the vice president of Fragrance Creative Center at Bell Flavors and Fragrances. Help me understand what that means. What is Bell's Flavors and Fragrances? Is it candles? Is it perfumes or colognes? Or
so I'm not sure if you're aware, but there is a very large multi-billion-dollar industry that develops fragrances and flavors, of which Bell is a player in that marketplace. Companies like ourselves, we have our clients are consumer packaged goods companies, and we are either proactively or reactively responding to needs from clients. In the case of Bell, it's a unique place in that it's family run. It's a different type of we have a different type of approach than, say, some of the larger players on the East Coast. I specifically left the East Coast, which was probably my last courageous move that I've made in the industry, because after 27 years on the East Coast, to actually move personally and professionally to the Midwest, it was quite a huge decision. And in fact, after I made that decision, the night I got into my hotel after I'd had the offer and I'd accepted it, I thought the room was going to fall in on me, because I thought, what in the heck have you done? You're leaving your friends, you're leaving all your contacts, you're leaving everything. But my kids were in college, and I decided I needed to do something for myself. I'd obviously maintained the stability for my kids staying in New Jersey, given it was really important for them, having been through such a tragedy. And but I came here because I wanted to be able to make an impact in the last part of my career. Instead of managing or co-managing with a colleague of mine 100 perfumers around the world and various people that worked with those perfumers around the world out east with IFF, I had an opportunity to manage a much smaller group. And it's kind of like a creation in the round. It's a very beautiful environment. It's almost like when you go out to eat and you want to sit around a round table as opposed to a long, narrow one. Yeah. You can get all the teams together. It's less about the administration. It's more about the innovation. A lot of talented people from the industry that just really wanted to be in an environment that was conducive to creativity. And we have a unique client base. Just as clients select us, we select them. We tell them that not to be pompous, but really that we want to make sure that we we have the right goods to be able to attend to them well. We ultimately, to answer your question, are designing the olfactive brand DNA. We want to make sure that we are developing a signature that is designed for good brand and concept fit, that it is also performant, be that as the fragrance creation or with various technologies built in. That might be for long lastingness, that might be for performance against particular odors, if it's a functional product. And also that it connects with the consumer on a deep emotional level, because fragrance is usually often, the first, if not the first or second reason why somebody might purchase something. And it certainly is the reason they won't purchase something if they don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
It often is the technology within a product. When I say that, you might think that the soap suds that are in the shampoo are the most important part because they got your hair clean, but the fragrance actually can signal things like clean and shine. You can create a shiny fragrance.
Mm-hmm.
And consumers will tell you these things. So that's what I do here. And I work with a very talented group of people. And we get the opportunity, actually the privilege, to work with clients that are often in a very innovative space because they're a lot of indie companies and very unique and innovative they're treading new ground. So it's exciting.
That is very well suited to you and your personality and what drives you, being there on a developmental stage and looking at new things and getting creative and working with startups that just suit you so well. Two quick things and then a final question, because I keep glancing over to check time. I want to respect your time. I appreciate so much you carving some out for us. When you accepted the position to move back to Chicago, you said you went back to your hotel room and started thinking, oh, what have I done? And that made me think of your initial reaction when you first accepted the job at Procter & Gamble. And there may not have been the same tears, maybe there were some, but that questioning, that fear, that apprehension, how did you take that in? And because it's happened at both ends of your career to date, how do you deal with that? How do you get through that? Because it's easy to say, go through the fear and see what's on the other side. But give us some insight, Deb, please, into how you actually did that in ongoing situations.
Well, I reassured myself that I had really pulled the opportunity apart and had thought about it very carefully about reasons why to stay in New Jersey or reasons why to go to this new firm in Chicago. So, the feeling came in the evening, and when you're about ready to go to bed and you're in the middle of the night and you think it's a nightmare, you tell yourself, look, it's always worse when it's in the when it's in the nighttime. You always make things really they're not as bad as they seem. So I said, you know what, just breathe, come back to breathe, just rest. We'll get up in the morning, we'll review everything again. And which I did. And I knew that it wasn't nearly as frightening as I thought it was when I was, drifting off to sleep.
Did you ever do anything to make it more tangible? Because part of that, in my experience, is when it's bouncing around my head, I can come up with all sorts of scenarios and things that are just completely outside of reality. Do you ever write down just to say, okay, that's exactly what it is, or do you sort through it mentally?
I usually go through that, whether it's written or whether it's in my mind. It's kind of the same process of trying to just break it down as to what was I attracted to here? Why is this important to me? How will this impact my family? And in the end, just like I mentioned earlier, for failing or falling forward, whatever, I could always go back. I mean, I'm not going to, but I could have. I just said to myself, it's not like I'm going to go off the edge of a cliff and I can never go back.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So we've not talked much about professional, but I do want to read this because this is, if I'm not mistaken, from your LinkedIn profile, but it sums you up so amazingly well, along with courageous, adventurous, accomplished, and a weirdo with grit. This is perhaps a more formal, a performance-driven human, passionate about people both personally and professionally. That's you. Loves helping connect people to brands through design. I want to talk to you more about that off camera and off podcast. Loves, combines, here's the important part, combines vision, informed risk-taking, and disciplined decision-making to drive innovation and efficiencies for growth. Informed risk-taking, disciplined decision-making. Those are things, so many people think that entrepreneurs are tremendous risk takers. They're not. Do they take risk? Yes, but it's not just here comes something, let's roll the dice and see it. It's informed risk taking, and to have that trait in life and professionally is pretty significant. So yeah, I'm glad you have that. I'm glad I get to have that reinforce the importance of that. And one final question. And if you're not expecting this, you didn't do your homework. And from everything in your life, from growing up with a father having you write resumes at the age of 14 and editing them and correcting them, to where you are today in a small, I'll say, boutique feel company versus the major companies you've been, everything in between with your beautiful children and the experiences of moving and your love and the cherished memories with David and the loss and everything else. When you look at things very simply, Deb, what's the point?
I think the common thread is that I thrive on bringing people together so that they can thrive themselves, or that they can, I'd like to, it's very fulfilling for me to find ways to help them feel comfortable with communication and collaboration, and to ultimately trust, whether that's personal or professional, because I think with those skills, you really can do anything, and it's rewarding for me to try to help people get into that place, my children as well as those that I work with.
Fantastic. And being able, as I said before, to come at delivering those lessons and presenting those thoughts for people to take or not comes from your personal experience. And you have been a shining example to me and now to all of my listeners, and probably to most everyone who's ever met you, what a human can do when they look for the opportunity, when they take the informed risk of stepping out of their comfort zone. Because let's face it, the adventure lies outside of our comfort zone. Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes tragedy does too, but if you look at that, you'll never walk across the street. So I love what you've done. I love your life. I love you. I'm grateful to have you as a friend. I'm grateful to have you as a guest on my podcast. Thank you, Deborah Wright. I look forward to seeing you again in person soon.
Thank you, Bill. It was my honor. Thanks.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise you'll gain value in every one. Rating and reviewing makes us more discoverable and helps others find out what's the point. And if you'd like to know more about Bill Ellis or contact him, please visit his website, www.brandingpillars.com. See you next time.